All right. So what I wanted to do is I really wanted to take you guys through normal mapping the actual gear. The nice thing is it's going to be the same process, so we're really just going to get to see this a second time, which is going to be cool. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the visibility off our crab body. Turn the visibility on. Remember, the little eyeballs are the visibility controls for the crab gear. I've been noticing I've been having this weird issue on mine that's like actually not showing it. I did something weird one time with this scene. So you notice I switched to a different viewport and then back. You shouldn't run into that. I did something slightly weird on mine, but it's still there and everything's fine. So once again, what we do is we have kind of this bit of a model here, right? And so what we really need to do is we need to have 2 copies of this, right? So in this case, I'm going to bring up my modifier stack because we're going to want to see that in a moment for this one. We'll probably also want to create ourselves a separate material for this guy as well, so we'll do that momentarily. But it doesn't really need to be for the high res, more for the low res. So remember, in this case, I want to copy this mesh right here, right? We've got the multi-resolution sculpt on it. We want to keep that, but we want to copy. So if you right-click on it, you'll see you can copy and paste. There's actually a quick key set, Control-C, Control-V. So I'll copy, make sure I'm in collection here, which usually it already is, but just to double check. And then you can right-click paste, and you see it's got a second one in here. Now remember, these eyeballs can turn the visibility off and on. I'm going to double-click this one because, you know, I'd rather have it be crab gear low instead of the 0.001. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the multi-resolution modifier for this one, right? So remember, it's that little X, right? Just get rid of it. Particularly if you're working in 2.9, that should be good there. And you'll notice we have 2 versions of this right now, right? We have the high-res version, and then we have the low-res version, right? So in this case, I'll kind of turn the eyeball off of the high-res version. That's the one that's got the multi-res and is subdivided up to hundreds of thousands of polygons. And this is the stock base one, right? Without multi-resolution, that's a much lower polygon count. And so what we want to do for this one is we want to create a new material for this one because we don't want to override the original material. Although you'll see right here there actually are a couple materials already applied to these. And we could change their names for stuff. So like you can see this one's material 1. If I went to crab body here, turn that on, you see that's material 01. And one of the things you can do is you can actually change the name right here. So we can call this crab body. There we go. And then if we click on this one, you'll see that's material 2, and we click on this one, that's crab body. So you can kind of see how it changed the name there. So really easy. It's kind of already creating the materials. But if you did need to create a new one, it's pretty easy. One of the things you could do is, particularly if you're in 4 for object mode, right? So your object mode. And remember, I'm in the shading viewport for this one just because you can see the normal map baking. You can see the nodes here. And you can even set up your viewport here. Remember, we're not using that one. We're using this one because it gives us Eevee. And then I just kind of click on this one to turn scene lights on. And then from there, I just made sure that the actual light is on, right? So you can see there's a light. I make sure the light visibility is on. And you can click on that light. And what I did is when you click on the light here, you'll see that there is, because this kind of green one that's in between these right here changes a little bit, right? So when you click on a light, you'll see that it looks like there's a little green light icon down here. So some of these actual icons here will change depending on which object you have selected, right? If it's like a curve, and we'll see it later on in Project 2, you see this looks like a green curve. And what I did is I just changed the light type, right? You can create multiple lights, but in this case, we've already got one default in the scene. So I just changed it to sun, which is a directional light. And then I just made sure to turn the strength down, because initially the strength is like 1,000, and it's quite bright. So I turned it down to like something like 30, so it looks more natural. And that just gives us this light looking a lot better. And when we have all that set, the cast shadow's already on, right? So you can kind of turn that off and on, as well as scene lights are here. So you can see that makes a difference. So just kind of keep that in mind for some of these things there. It's some of the stuff I went over last time in the other video, and I just want to reiterate that stuff. So in this case, I'm going to go back to this object, the crab low, and you can see that we can change this one to crab gear, right? There we go. Now, if you ever wanted to create a new material, if you're in object mode, right, 4 for object mode, if you right-click, you'll see one of the options. Actually, we're not seeing it here. Usually you'll see it in certain instances. Why am I not seeing it right now? Let me see here. Yeah. You'll sometimes see when you're in object mode that there will be some material options here. I think I might not have turned that on. It's, I think, an add-on I have at home. But you can always go down here, right? That little blue, or not blue, but a red kind of sphere shape. And you'll see that here you can actually see all your materials, right? So if we go to here, we can kind of click on that. You can see there's crab gear, crab body that I've created. But you'll also notice that there is a button, new material, right? And you can hit that. And what that'll do is it'll create a new material that you can then assign to whatever you want, right? There'll be like assign buttons and all that stuff. So if I went to material here, and you can get like little previews if you want to see them and all that stuff. Usually you don't need to see it though. But you will see that there's kind of like apply buttons down here and all that stuff. In this case, it kind of already had the materials I wanted, so we're in pretty good shape for those. But this would allow you to create a new material or delete a material, right? So you can always go to this material guy here. I feel like I have an add-on that gives me the turned on that gives me the material stuff, but from the right click. But in this case, you can see that that's actually working pretty well for us. And you can always go to this red sphere for your material stuff as well. Creating new ones right here, deleting them. There will even be assign buttons here as well. Particularly if you're like in 3. Actually, I think that's what it is. If you hit 3 for face mode, and then you select all the faces, I'm still not seeing there. But you'll see that you have assign, select, deselect, so you can actually assign materials to specific polygons if you want to, right? So keep that in mind, that you have those kind of abilities to create and assign those if you need to. In this case, I was kind of okay there, and the materials were already there. But just those little kind of things that you might need to do. That's kind of stuff as we go along we can address one-on-one in class sometimes. But yeah, so I just want to kind of get you guys to see that you can start to name materials, create materials, right? So if I hit this, there's now a new material there. Usually it'll kind of, I think, default assign it to whatever object is there. In this case, I didn't really need that one. So we'll just make sure crab gear is applied. And you'll see it's there. Let's apply that regular crab gear. But you have those options right there. That'll create stuff for you. And then you can actually pick whichever one is assigned just through here, right? So that's kind of what the little pull down here is whatever object selected. See how it's crab body? And then I can just kind of change it. So just keep that in mind, a little bit about that stuff. Creating new materials, deleting materials, which I found sometimes is a little weird. This little red sphere gives you the material controls, as well as here, of course, as well. You can technically even set them up from here as well, so you have all the same controls there. New material, X, you can name them. So kind of the shading area gives you this node that gives you material controls, and this red sphere gives you material controls. And then you just really select the object, and you can kind of pick which material you want to be on there. All right. So in this case, we've got our materials on there, and I just want to kind of go over that a little more with you guys, just because, you know, it's one of those things we need to start talking about with our stuff. In this case, what I need to create a new texture for this guy, right? And so what we did last time is we went add, right? And we went to a texture, image texture, right? So we go to add, texture, image texture, and then it automatically gives us this guy that we can just click to drop anywhere. And this will eventually plug into the normal channel here, right? But for right now, we're fine with where it's at. What I want to do is I want to create a new one. So I create new, and we'll give it a resolution. 2048s for this should be fine, because we didn't really push polygon counts that high. You know, we had a couple million total for the whole crab. A 2048 by 2048 is 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels. Really, 2,048 pixels by 2,048 pixels. But if you times 2,000 by 2,000, it's 4 million. So that's an equivalent of 4 million polygons. So kind of the 2048s are definitely give us enough to have our textures look nice. In particular, a 32-bit floating point will have more bit depth per color channel of the texture, so it can help it look nicer and cleaner. It also makes the file size bigger, so particularly for something like a bump map or a normal map, it's probably good to have 32-bit floating point. For a lot of your other textures, though, you're probably okay just without that on. But you could always turn it on to get a bit of a higher quality texture. It'd also be a bigger file size as well. So I'm going to hit OK. And now there's actually a texture properly plugged in there. And we just make sure that this is selected, right? See how you can kind of click on these and it selects them? And with that selected, we can now go back to here and turn on the visibility for the other stuff. So we'll kind of turn the visibility on for the crab gear and crab low. And I'll just make sure to select both of them, right? Usually crab low first and then that next one. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back up, right? Because the red sphere down here is our material controls, although we have those here as well. And of course we have our modifiers. But way up here, kind of towards the top, what looks kind of like a microwave or a briefcase, that is your render properties, right? And there's some cool stuff there, right? We switched to cycles to do this, but by default it's usually set to Eevee, which is Blender's real-time render, and it's quite cool. In fact, when we start doing metals and glows, we're going to turn Bloom on, and it's going to make the metals and glows look really, really awesome in real time. It's going to look so cool. Some of you guys that remember incandescence in Mudbox kind of looked okay. The emission channels in this and the Bloom are going to blow Mudboxes out of the water. It's going to be awesome when you guys see how good metals and stuff look in here. But we don't want Eevee right now, right? Because we want to bake. And to do baking stuff, we need to have cycles on. And this is the full Blender renderer. So we'll eventually be using cycles to do the final renders anyways. So we make sure to pick our render engine to be cycles. There we go. And we'll see down here that was that baking section that we opened up, right, in the other video. So we open up bake. And you see a lot of it set up to what I did last time, right? I picked bake type be normal. So you see how there's lots of things you can bake. You can bake ambient occlusion, the glossiness, right? In this case, we just want to bake a normal. The default tangent should be fine, but if you want object that's there variable, you can even reverse the axes. Some engines actually have the axes reversed, so this actually gives you that extra control to be able to say, hey, you know, Unity uses negative Y or something like that. I'm not sure if that's the case, but like you can do that if you need to. We also want to have selected to active on. I usually check this on. And you open this up, right, because that gives you the extrusion control. And that's a pretty good way to kind of have it grow out, right? Kind of it's virtually extruding the geometry so it's bigger than it is so that it encompasses the geometry on the high-res that goes outside of it. So it's kind of like a better controlled ray search, really. So I find extrusion just gives us a better result. So that's what I'm going to use. And with that guy selected, we can then hit bake. And you'll see it's going to take probably about 30 seconds or so. And there we go. And you can see right over here that actually baked quite nice, right? So you can see we've got the buttons looking pretty good there, the little kind of inflates and the little lines we did looking pretty good. So you can see that baked out pretty nice for us, right? And whatever other details there would have been there. And you see that these tangent space maps have this kind of predominant purple color. But you also see kind of teals and magentas and a bit of reds and greens. Remember, that's really just the normal directions, right? There's hundreds, thousands, or millions of polygons on this, and all their polygons are pointing in their own ways. That's the normal direction. But when it's trying to bake that down, it looks at the direction it's pointing in relation to the actual world axes. And so that's why you're getting like teals, right? Because many of these normals are actually kind of in between, you know, Z and Y, right? Or Y and X. So you'll get red, green, and blue, but you'll also get kind of the spectrum of blends between X, Y, and Z because all of the different normals facing everywhere. So that's our normal map. That's how we bake normal maps. Now, once this texture has been created, you want to make sure to save it. See these three little bars? We click on that, and you see there's kind of an area called image. It's got an asterisk. That means a texture has to be saved. So it's a nice little thing of Blender that lets you know, hey, there's a texture in here that needs to be saved. And you just can click on it and go to save. And then it pops you right up to here, and we can just go to desktop if we want. I could call this crab gear normal. Just call it crab. And usually when you do texture files, it's good to have underscores in it. Crab gear underscore normal. And also naming it what kind of map type it is, like normal map's a good idea. Like later on, we're going to paint color maps. So we'll save that. And now we've got that normal map saved. So that's how the baking works, right? The nice things we showed in the other video, and that's the kind of thing if you guys end up having problems with baking, you know, we'll be able to talk about that later this week or next week. So that's how baking works. What we want to do now at this point is I'm going to turn the visibility off of the high one. We won't delete it quite yet in case we need to rebake, but it looks like we're good. So what we need to do here is I'm going to make sure to pick the new one. And actually, if you want to kind of pick the proper one that's outside of it, you'll notice there are these folders, right? So I can click on this folder, and I can actually properly go find that normal map that I created. Let's see here, desktop. Should be somewhere here. Crab gear normal. There we go. And so that's actually should load in the proper one. What are you doing? Why am I not seeing it there? If need be, you can always delete that node and add in another one, right? Add texture, image texture, and then you can go to open, right? Go find it. Where are you at? Crab gear normal. So that little yellow, the little folder opens it up. I don't know why it keeps calling it untitled, but whatever. In this case, it should be properly loading that in. And now what we want to do is we want to left-click drag on this color, right? That little color, yellow color node. We left-click drag on that little circle, and we drag it to normal, right? And what that does is that plugs that in. Why are you not seeing that? You really should be able to see those there. Let me see if I can open it from here. There we go, open image. What are you doing? Weird. We should be seeing that. Not sure why. All right, so we've got that plugged in there. Let's see if we can kind of get it set up properly also. So I'm going to go to Add, and let's go to Converter, and sorry, not Converter, Vector, Normal Map. And automatically, whenever you create a node, it kind of already has it set to drag wherever you want to. And you'll notice when I put it in between here, you see how that kind of line becomes brighter white? That's because if you click on it, it plugs it in. There we go. So you see the normal map actually is in. Sometimes it just calls it that name. We'll click on this to pick crab gear. And you'll notice that we could turn the strength up. That's why I like this normal map node, because we can actually control the strength to make it more intense. There we go. And sRGB seems to be working pretty well. But like I said, if for whatever reason your sRGB is not doing what you expect it to, I found that sometimes raw works great for color space. Particularly in the earlier versions of Blender, I think they really wanted to do raw. I think they're fine with sRGB now. It might have been one of those little added tweaks they did. And just to double check, I always like to make sure, particularly with this texture plugged in, that I go to Add, Input, UV Map, and we can left-click drag on this purple dot. There we go. Connect it to that purple dot vector. And then we just make sure it's using the proper UVs. And there we go. Now at this point, if I want, I could probably delete the high res and turn on crab body. And you'll see both normal maps are plugged in and actually looking pretty good on our crab. But you'll notice that this is the low resolution mesh, right? In this case, you can see how these are kind of sticking through each other a little bit. If you want to, you can always, make minor adjustments of shape after the fact. So yeah. But you'll notice that when we click on these, there we go. And we can kind of see the same nodal network, right? But the nice thing is we got to kind of play around with that nodal network. And you see that Blender's actually quite user-friendly about doing it. So some of you guys remember Maya's nodal network. Very similar principle, but I quite frankly find Blender's a lot more user-friendly. But it's always kind of good if you're not using the text tools add-on, which we'll talk about on our next project, to do this. And this is just a great way to get you guys exposed to some basics for this, right? You can really just add any node you want, which is just this little packets of information from these different areas that are basically categories. And then just kind of selecting them, putting them in their proper places, making sure UVs are properly lined up. And some of these neat controls. You're going to see when we do glow later on, we're actually going to create a proper emission shader that we're going to plug into the emission channel here. And that's going to give us a strength control so we could plug in an actual emission map, but also make that more intense like this one. And that's all quite easy to do. It's pretty easy to connect stuff and even create blenders in between there. So yeah, but you can see that now that detail is there, but you notice how it's on our high-res sculpt, those rivets kind of stuck off the surface, right? Whereas here, it's actually flat, right? This is the secret to video games, right? Is that they don't actually have all that geometry in there. But But what they do is they use a high resolution mesh to bake that real geometry down into an actual texture that ultimately, when you get close enough, will look flat, but generally will look pretty awesome in most situations. And you can kind of see how your light actually interacts with it, right? So you see how kind of the shadowing changes on it? And that's one of the reasons why a few years ago, right, our actual lighting or our games started looking a lot better, right? Because they actually have this normal mapping on them. And also you guys get to start to see Eevee and the fact that Eevee is actually quite cool, right? So that's good. I think that'll be a great place to stop with normal map baking, right? So I think we'll stop there.